Hi, I'm Hugh Riley, co-host of the Tempo Network series, The Road Ahead. When we think of visiting the Caribbean and moving around that wide expanse of countries and territories, our thoughts immediately focus on one current obstacle, COVID-19, and the enormous difficulty the pandemic has created for everyone seeking to travel to and within the Caribbean. Airlines, passengers, industry staff at all levels, even the governments themselves, all seem afraid of the dangers of opening up borders. Of course, the consequences of staying shut are also severe. Millions of people out of work, businesses on the brink of bankruptcy, families facing desperation. Then, in the midst of it all, someone seizes the opportunity to make a difference. What makes their timing right? What do they know that the rest of us don't? And who are they anyway? Well, let's find out. One such company is Inter-Caribbean Airways, the biggest little airline you never heard of. They are focused on making a difference. Coming up on the September 3rd edition of The Road Ahead, Dr. Frederick Morton and I will chat with the Hi, I'm Hugh Riley, co-host of the Tempo Network series, The Road Ahead. When we think of visiting the Caribbean and moving around that wide expanse of countries and territories, our thoughts immediately focus on one current obstacle, COVID-19, and the enormous difficulty the pandemic has created for everyone seeking to travel to and within the Caribbean. Airlines, passengers, industry staff at all levels, even the governments themselves, all seem afraid of the dangers of opening up borders. Of course, the consequences of staying shut are also severe. Millions of people out of work, businesses on the brink of bankruptcy, families facing desperation. Then, in the midst of it all, someone seizes the opportunity to make a difference. What makes their timing right? What do they know that the rest of us don't? And who are they anyway? Well, let's find out. One such company is Inter-Caribbean Airways, the biggest little airline you never heard of. They are focused on making a difference. Coming up on the September 3rd edition of The Road Ahead, Dr. Frederick Morton and I will chat with the chairman and the CEO of Inter-Caribbean Airways about the bold new moves the company is making to connect pretty much the entire Caribbean. We'll also hear from a leading economist about the impact of travel and tourism on the people of the Caribbean, and we'll probe the thorny issue of how to make intra-Caribbean travel affordable to more of us. All that and more on The Road Ahead, Thursday, September 3rd at 3 p.m., live on Tempo YouTube and Facebook. Please join us.
Greetings, my name is Frederick Morton Jr. I am the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Tempo Networks, one of the leading media and television networks in the Caribbean. I am currently standing in front of the Piarco International Airport here in Trinidad and Tobago, but there is nowhere to go. No flights in, no flights out. The country is currently under lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic that we are all facing. Now, without travel, there is no commerce, and our economies here in the Caribbean are bound to suffer greatly without decisive action being made. Indeed, one of the leading airlines in the Caribbean has already fell victim to the impact of the pandemic. Liat Airlines is, at least for the time being, no more. Without planning and innovation from both the public and private sector, the road ahead will be a rough one. In the next edition of The Road Ahead, we tackle this very important topic. How will we move around in the Caribbean? Thankfully, entrepreneurship is still thriving throughout the region, and a new and well-positioned airline, Inter-Caribbean, is set to fill the void. Join me and my co-host, Mr. Hugh Riley, partner at the Portfolio Marketing Group and former Secretary General of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, as we explore this very critical topic with both the chairman and CEO of Inter-Caribbean and a leading Caribbean economist. This is a topic we must address, and as we navigate the road ahead, we must pay particular attention to how we move around. Join us Thursday, September 3rd at 3 p.m. See you there. Welcome, Tempo family. I am Frederick Morton Jr., founder and chairman of Tempo Networks. Welcome to another edition of The Road Ahead. It is the beginning of September, and by now I would have personally traveled to several Caribbean islands, executing Tempo productions and conducting business throughout the Caribbean. Many of us would have been island hopping to festivals and carnivals, and our region would have certainly already received tens of millions of tourists from throughout the world. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, has wreaked havoc on Caribbean travel and tourism. Indeed, one of the main airlines which facilitated much of the Caribbean travel for decades, Liat Airlines, has gone out of business and is, at least for the time being, no more. Today on The Road Ahead, Connecting the Caribbean, we discuss, among other things, the state of Caribbean travel and tourism. When can we expect to travel again with any regularity, and what airlines will be around to take us around? We are privileged today to have with us a very distinguished panel of industry experts, including a leading Caribbean economist, as well as the founder and the CEO of Inter-Caribbean Airways, which is well positioned to fill the Caribbean travel void left vacant by Liat. In moderating, I am joined as always by my esteemed colleague and good friend and co-host, Mr. Hugh Riley, partner at the PM Marketing Group and former Secretary General of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, who I will ask, as customary, to introduce our esteemed panel of guests. Hugh, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Frederick. And an esteemed panel it certainly is.
Indeed.
Mr. Lyndon Gardiner was born on North Caicos in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and after spending the first 10 years of his business career in finance, he decided to follow the example of his two older brothers, and he went to Fort Lauderdale to attend flight school. He purchased his first plane in 1991 and started providing an informal but popular on-demand air taxi service that he called Inter-Island Airways. In those early days of flying in the Turks and Caicos, Lyndon was often called out in the middle of the night to fly medevac flights after having put in a full day's work. He felt a strong obligation to assist, as a medevac flight flown by his longtime friend, the late Howard Hamilton, had actually saved Lyndon's own life after a devastating motorcycle accident on Grand Turk that broke both his legs. By 1999, he had acquired a small fleet and was running a full-fledged charter service. Realizing that his true potential lay in business and not flying, he left the piloting to others and concentrated on growing his fledgling airline. Chairman and founder of Inter-Caribbean Airways, Lyndon Gardiner, welcome to The Road Ahead.
Thank you very much.
Trevor Sadler is CEO of Inter-Caribbean Airways, joining Lyndon Gardiner on the journey to expand a pan-Caribbean airline in 2013, pardon me. Trevor is based in Provo, Turks and Caicos Islands. He was born in England, has over 30 years of experience in the airline industry on 4 continents, having worked in the UK, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, the USA, Malaysia, Aruba, and of course in Turks and Caicos Islands. His experience includes working with full-service airlines, hybrid and low-cost airlines, including several airline startups. Today, Trevor's passion is building Inter-Caribbean Airways. CEO of Inter-Caribbean Airways, Trevor Sadler, welcome to The Road Ahead.
Thank you, Hugh. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us today.
Pleasure to have you. Dr. Justin Ram is a senior economist with over 25 years of practical advisory, research, and management experience. He was previously Director of Economics of the Economics Department at the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, and a member of the bank's management team. Before joining the CDB, Justin's experience included senior global economist with Worley Parsons, supervisory economist with the Mayor of London, Greater London Authority, technical director with Jacobs Engineering, and an economist with the UK government's Department for Transport. He has also been a class teacher at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and was lecturer in economics at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago. Founder, CEO, and Managing Director of GSEC, Dr. Justin Ram, welcome to The Road Ahead.
Thank
Well,
you very much, Hugh.
welcome. Dr. Frederick Morton, that's our cast. It's over to you, sir. How should we begin?
Well, it's a fine cast indeed. Very much looking forward to this discussion. And let me add my thanks to the entire panel for being here. Thank you. Let's, as I often say, start at the best place, which is the beginning, and talk about the current state of the travel and tourism industry in the Caribbean. I think the best place to start would be to look at sort of the economics of what's happening. And so we will start with you, Dr. Ram. Justin, this is an area that you know a lot about. First, give us a sense of your organization and your work. And then if you would be so kind to bring us up to speed on the current state of travel and tourism in the Caribbean with a particular emphasis or focus on the impact of the pandemic.
Okay, thanks very much, Frederick. Well, I'm now co-founder and CEO of GSEC, which really stands for Government Securities. And what we're attempting to do is to use technology to digitalize the issuance and trading of government securities. And I should say we're not only sticking to government securities, but in the future we will be doing private securities as well. So it's a way to actually get more people involved in investment and making it easy using the digital platforms to do that. So it's along the line. It's a fintech organization, and as we know, all things are moving towards technology. So I'm certainly moving in that direction. As it relates to the COVID-19 impact on our economies in the Caribbean, it is no secret that it has been quite devastating. When you look at where, for example, many of the countries that rely on tourism, what has happened to tourism arrivals since the onset of this COVID-19 pandemic, it has been something that even I as an economist would never have imagined that this could be possible. So for example, if you look back to where occupancy rates were in January of this year and compare those rates to where they have been by March, or by the end of March, we've seen over a 90% decline in tourism arrivals in the Caribbean. And Frederick, because our economies are so dependent on tourism, tourism actually leads to a lot of value added and additional benefits for the economy. So if you actually were to turn off that particular tap for our economies, it leads to a drying up of the stream much lower down. In fact, it means that very much our economic rivers are no longer reaching the sea. That means that there are knock-on effects for employment. So many persons have been hit very badly by not being employed, but there's also been a real knock-on effect for government revenues. Governments have also been very reliant on the receipts from tourism industry, and as well from the receipts from those persons who work in the tourism industry. With all of those avenues now being hit, it also means that our governments have been hit hard. And remember that before going into this crisis, many of our countries were not in a very good place. We have fairly high levels of debt, and our economic growth rates were really not as where they should be if we want to bring more people out of poverty. So we sort of have a double whammy here, where we've gone into this being very vulnerable, and it's more than likely that when we come out of this, our extreme vulnerabilities are going to be exposed further. So I expect that this recovery from this COVID-19 pandemic is going to be a slow one. And the reason I say that is when I look back at what has happened after 9/11 and what has happened after the great financial crisis a decade after 9/11, it took many of our tourism-related industries about 40 to 55 months to recover. And both of those crises had different impacts. With September 11, there was a fear of flying. With the financial crisis, household balance sheets were severely impacted. So people didn't have money to fly. This pandemic is actually having both of those effects right now. And so this is some of the issues that we have to deal with. And so I expect our governments are going to have to spend quite a lot to stimulate our economies. So we're going to have to go into quite a bit of debt. We're going to have a higher appetite for debt coming out of this. But I think we're going to have to be very, very innovative in how we think about coming out of this. And I just want to say one last point. The only way for us to come out of this better at the end of it is to have much greater private sector-led growth and much greater private sector involvement in our economy. And so I am very happy to be sitting on a panel here with two gentlemen, both Lyndon and Trevor, who are actually leading lights in this regard with respect to the Caribbean. We need more entrepreneurs and more capitalists like them doing what they are doing in the Caribbean right now if we are to come out of this successfully.
Well, this is a great point, Justin. Let's stay with the point about the governments for a second, because the governments have been accused of putting all of the Caribbean's eggs in the tourism basket, and also accused of not putting aside any sort of rainy day fund for crises such as this. So I hear you about the role that the private sector must play, and we are going to talk about that at some length. But what's your advice on those 2 points to the governments of the Caribbean?
Well, it's very much related to the point about why we need greater private sector-led growth. Because what has happened is that many of our economies are not competitive enough. In fact, out of 191 countries, on average, the Caribbean countries are ranked 125 out of 191 countries in terms of the ease of doing business. Now, when you are so uncompetitive, it means that the private sector is unable to be competitive and unable to generate the type of employment that your economy needs. When that happens, the government then has to step in and fill that void. What I'm saying now is that the government needs to step back from doing that, ease the doing business environment so we can have more private sector-led growth. In so doing, the governments would now have greater fiscal space to save for that rainy day, because that's also going to be important. And so it's a very much what I like to term as a virtuous circle. When I like to say about why we need greater private sector-led growth, it's actually because of this great vulnerability and why we need to build resilience, why governments need to save more. But they can't save more right now because they are having to do things because our economies are so uncompetitive and our private sector is unable to thrive. So those are actually critical components of coming out of this in a much more resilient way.
Well, that is, I mean, at first, as you were talking, Justin, I mean, there's so much doom and gloom in it that you begin to worry about what will actually help us to recover. So I was glad to hear that you offered at least a potential solution to that recovery, which is private sector-led growth. As an entrepreneur myself, I know what's involved in building business, and I know the difficulties that are had with working with government, et cetera, in certain ways. But these things will have to be improved for us to get out of the situation that we're in. So that leads me directly to you, Lyndon. If you can unmute your mic, that'd be great. You know, as an entrepreneur who has done, quite frankly, something tremendous, building an airline and getting it to a point where it could be or is the leading airline in the region is no small feat. So let me first welcome you again and thank you for your time. And I want to focus you on that point about private sector-led growth. Tell us, first of all, Lyndon, about a little bit about Inter-Caribbean Airways from your perspective as the founder, how you envisioned owning an airline, getting it launched, and again, now positioning it to become the leading carrier, you know, connecting the Caribbean with over 27 current destinations. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you, Frederick, and thank you for having me on the show. It's certainly my pleasure to be here. Quite frankly, when I started Inter-Island Airways back in 1991, it was not in mind with having the Pan-Caribbean airline that we have today. I was just a banker wanting to spend some time with my girlfriend in another island, and I had suffered the issue of being able to go there, visit, and then come back. And so that was the genesis of the purchase of the plane. But then soon thereafter, I was able to do some private flights, and it opened my eyes to the possibilities and also to the need that we have in the Caribbean for air services. Fast forward that from 1991 to 2003, we were able to get a schedule license. At the time, the Turks and Caicos was really in a mode of growth, both in the tourism sector. We had at that time still a banking sector, and so there was a need to move people between some of the banking sectors in the Caribbean. I'm talking Barbados, Cayman, and the Bahamas, and of course the Turks and Caicos and the British Virgin Islands was right up there in terms of the volume of business that there was. And then we were essentially providing the connective services between the Turks and Caicos and those islands. In 2008, when the economy crashed, we were faced with another challenge. Obviously, the economy in the Turks and Caicos contracted, and we were looking to see, well, how do we maintain our business? How do we basically not only maintain, but how do we stay in business? And we looked at what happens in the Caribbean in terms of air transportation, and how we can gear ourselves up for positioning ourselves to take advantage of whatever opportunity it was. Now, I must say that in the beginning, it was a very daunting task. First of all, you're competing with some of the Goliaths of this business. I can tell you, up until the time when we started doing inter-Caribbean connections, everyone in the Caribbean to move from one island to an island next door would either go over Miami, over Panama, over Fort Lauderdale, and as far as New York. And so there were established routes of which people were very familiar and very comfortable with. There were some quite large players in the market that was offering a good service, be it a service that took anywhere from 8 or 9 hours to be able to get to the island next door. Mr. Settler joined us in 2013, and we developed a plan to create this inter-Caribbean connections. At the time, we were called Air Turks and Caicos. Our first order of business was to change the name so that there's a lot in the name, Frederick. Mm-hmm. And in any business, once you say the name, people kind of get excited about and what you do and how you do. And we felt it was important, being a Caribbean airline, that we were, and being servicing the entire Caribbean, that our name took on something that represented that people in all parts of the Caribbean could identify themselves with. And that's where the name Inter-Caribbean came from.
Excellent.
So, that was the genesis, that was the growth the company has gone through in the last 7 years. I can tell you it's been a very difficult task in many ways. First of all, when we started out, just the regulatory hurdles of being able to get landing rights in all of these destinations was certainly a problem. And then being able to remote the service was another problem. And then having people have that confidence in your brand, that is something that's developed over time. And I can say quite confidently that people have developed confidence in our brand. We have been here for 28 plus years. In 2019, we carried over 400,000 people in the Northern Caribbean alone. And so we are adding value. No longer do you need to spend 8 or 9 hours of your time and go through the US to get from Santo Domingo to Kingston, Jamaica. Mm-hmm. This is something that we can do in 1 hour and 40 minutes. So besides saving you time and saving you money, that's essentially giving you a lot of your life back and giving you the money to help enjoy it.
Right, indeed. Remarkable report. Sorry, Hugh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
the whole point is that you've certainly made an enormous contribution to jump-starting the tourism industry, or I should say restarting it, because Justin Ram pointed out that we're all in the Caribbean in dire straits unless things get going again, and this big engine that's driving the economies can really get going. So how does Inter-Caribbean really contribute towards jump-starting? I mean, I'm going to ask Trevor Sadler to tell us who's really on those airplanes. Chairman Gardner says there's a lot of people on these planes and he's flying a lot of routes. Who are these people? Are these Caribbean people visiting other Caribbean countries? Are these people coming from large source markets and fanning around the Caribbean? Are these people who are making multi-destination vacation stops? Who are these people that you're moving around in your effort to try and restart this big economic engine? Trevor Sadler?
Thank you, Hugh, for the question. The reality for us, it's been an evolution of who is the customer that we fly. And if you go back to, say, 2013, much of the customer base was persons who lived on one island, but I come from another island and I want to go home. Because we did not have at that time frequent flights. So it wasn't necessarily so convenient for the business traveler who needed to come and go in a day or maybe 2 days, but having to keep adjusting around the then schedule we might offer you. So as the evolution of changing from really being a point-to-point carrier to creating our first little hublet of connectivity, what that allowed is we no longer had to rely on those who would come and go only to the Turks and Caicos, but we can offer you a connection. So we rearranged how we fly, and airplanes would overnight at out locations, come back in. We would then deplane customers and through the terminal, then rearrange who's going out on which flight, add the local joining customers, and off we go again. And that gave us the genesis to now move from the 2 and 3 flights a week to now daily on all of these core trunk routes. And as that happened, so came the evolution of change of the customer mix. So yes, we still had the same customers we always had, but now we were interesting to the business traveler because I could come and go, be it an overnight, mostly an overnight as the minimum, going to another country nearby, and began the beginning of really having tourists who would come in on these flights. So come in to Turks and Caicos, maybe from the USA, but then after a stay here would then continue, say, to the Dominican Republic and perhaps take that same airline home from there. Similarly with tourism from Europe. So as we have grown the number of connective points that we have, establishing traffic that would connect over 3 and now 4 principal points, so the evolution of people coming from the other side of the world seemed to keep popping up. So the frequency at which we would suddenly see Australian travelers, New Zealand travelers, persons coming out of China, coming either individually or groups. The idea that Chinese always travel in groups is a misnomer. And you would see a lot of young couples coming on their own and planning out these trips. So the evolution of who we see and saw got on our airplanes evolved as we entered into new markets. And particularly a good example of that would be the entry into Havana. As we fly Havana to Santo Domingo off to Tortola, come back to Provo. So as Havana is a fairly strong international presence, in the last year has been Turkish Airlines. And Turkish Airlines, being a substantial network carrier, would bring folks out of Istanbul nonstop into Havana. Those folks have and some time in Cuba, and they would continue on with us to often to the Dominican Republic. So you could get on that flight and you could find, and as I've seen and looked at the nationality mix to see, here was 5 people from Israel, 3 people from Switzerland, 5 more that were Turkish, and then several other nationalities that were coming on the behind flight. So we might have half an airplane at a time with other nationalities other than the origin and destination nationalities you may expect. So the more we multiplied the number of flights that would connect with other destinations, so it became the multiplication of who actually wanted to go somewhere. We would see a lot of French people coming into the French Caribbean, then taking a carrier out of the French Caribbean over the Dominican Republic, going over to Cuba, or coming over to Providenciales. So we really, we've evolved just who is the face of the traveler that we expect, and it's always welcome to see more different nationalities and surprises over the way in which folks travel around the Caribbean.
Awesome. Such a, again, brilliant story. I have some follow-up for both you, Trevor, and for Lyndon, but let me go back to Justin for a second, because a question popped into my mind here. How important, Justin, to the economies, Caribbean economies, to have regional travel recover swiftly? Tell us, what are the factors involved in that happening, and how important is that? I mean, I guess where I'm going is business travel, as Trevor alluded to, business travel in the region, or trade. What is the size of the impact of the current pandemic on the industry, such that the necessity of interregional travel coming back is of utmost or critical importance? Is that something that needs to come back quickly?
Certainly, yes. But just to say, one thing the pandemic has shown is that, we, like, for example, what we're using today, the technology has allowed us to work much more remotely. But I have to say a big but here. When it comes to actually doing business deals, there is no substitute for having that face-to-face discussion.
That is true.
And being able to look someone in the eye and to have a handshake, or to sign on that dotted line before someone. A lot of business, therefore, right now, I would say we have a lot of latent business activity that isn't happening because we are unable to move around as freely as we were doing before. And I should say, even before this, I mean, getting around the Caribbean was quite difficult, based on what Chairman Gardner and Trevor were just saying. So all I can say here is that it is critical that a number of things need to happen for us to encourage greater intra-regional travel. While I was at CDB back in 2018, we did a study that looked at what was really going on. We had a lot of growth in extra-regional travel, but intra-regional travel between 2007 and 2017 had actually declined, while every other travel was actually increasing. And there were really 3 major areas that I think we need to look at if we really want to get back to where we were, but also encourage a lot more intra-regional travel, because there's a lot of latent demand there. The first is we need to look at taxes and fees, right? Without a doubt, taxes and fees need to be reduced. That is an imperative if we are going to encourage many more people to travel around the region. For many persons, it's cheaper to go to Miami than it is for them to travel within the Caribbean. And I know, looking at the data back then, as much as 60% of an airfare was taxes and fees between BGI in Barbados and St. Lucia, and Castries and St. Lucia. 60%. You see what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
In addition to that, we had a situation where we don't use our assets efficiently. That is, the airports are not run efficiently. So that if you were to try to travel, if I am going, for example, from Barbados up to St. Kitts, and I have to go through Antigua, it can be quite a daunting task, meaning that I have to go through checking my hand luggage again just to get back onto the same plane that I just left. So we don't use our assets well. That also means that for a lot of the time, we weren't using our airlines efficiently as well, our aircraft. We were using the wrong type of planes on the wrong type of routes. And I think now with greater private sector involvement, that is likely to change because the private sector is really in about risk management and to make a profit. So I don't expect a private sector firm to be using the wrong type of equipment on the wrong type of route. And then finally, we need to ensure that our regulatory environment is up to scratch. We really have a great opportunity now if we want to get intra-regional travel back to where it was and to grow in the future. We must reform the regulatory environment. That means there is something called the Multilateral Air Services Agreement that we need to have all members of CARICOM sign on to. So what that simply says is that, look, if I have a license to travel, if Barbados gives me a license to travel, it should mean that I have the opportunity to use my aircraft anywhere within the Caribbean without having to go through that relicensing arrangement again. Finally, on that score, we should also make it easier for passengers to move around easily. Like I said, if I have to go to St. Kitts from Barbados, traditionally I would have to go through Antigua. I have to go show my passport again. I have to go through security and then reboard the same plane. Now tell me, Frederick, what could have happened between Barbados and Antigua that I now have to go through security again? It just doesn't make sense.
I've asked myself that question many times.
Right, and a lot of that has to do with the regulatory environment, and of course the need for governments to try to get some taxes, because once I have used that airport, it means that they can apply a tax based on my airfare. I'm saying we can come away from all of this. We can have one flat fee, and we can decide how we divvy up those revenues between the different governments so that it can be equitable. But I think that it can be done, and now is the time, while we have this a bit of a lull, to make these significant reforms. So that's where I'd like to leave that.
Well,
if I may add in, Frederick,
sure.
before
Yep.
you, I think Dr. Ram is spot on. I certainly believe that we've entered a climate of where government certainly is going to have to look at facilitating air travel and regional air travel, and not look at it as a source of income. And I think we, by looking at it as a source of income, we short ourselves by not having the disposable income move around in our region as it should. And by doing so, people attempt to say, look, if I can spend the same $350 or whatever and go to Miami, and then I can go in a shopping mall, then that's where the money goes. And it is us that is creating the environment in which the money depart our shores.
Right. Well, I'm glad you picked that up, Lyndon, because I was coming to you as a follow-up on that, because it certainly has been said that it's not really possible to turn profit flying inter-island routes. As an outsider to the aviation industry, it certainly seemed to me that probably was not exactly correct, because I could see, even as an outsider, that there were certain inefficiencies, particularly by some of the government-led airlines. But there are, excessive maintenance costs to some extent, and the takeoffs and the landings and using the right equipment and all of that is very important. And those type of strategic decisions need to be made very carefully. And unions and all kinds of things.
Sorry, Dr. Morton, just
Sure.
add to that taxation issue, it becomes a personal passion, because I find myself having to revisit the taxes a lot. And just for the listeners who may not have a regard for the amounts of money we're talking about, within our network, the taxation, I'll leave out the names of the countries, but go from country A to country C via country B. And the most you can pay on anything we have right now is $240 in taxes and fees that are assessed by the airports and or the governments of those countries. So that's just the taxes and fees on the journey, aside from into Caribbean actually having some revenue called a ticket. So such is that number that customers who pay with a credit card, we also have to now absorb the credit card fees on collecting these taxes for the governments. So when you're talking of another 3 and 4% in monies that we have to take out of the revenue stream in order to be the tax collector on behalf of each country, the burden on us as an airline, let alone also for the traveler, is very significant.
Right.
So,
Well, that was very interesting, because I didn't even think about that the airline is almost like a tax collector for the government as well. I didn't really think of that. But okay, with all that said, and we know the certain inefficiencies that would have caused LIAT to be in its position, et cetera. Lyndon, let me ask you, I mean, tell me a little bit about the investment that you're making in expanding. In a previous conversation, you said that you're investing in the future. So if you're investing in the future, there got to be some bright light in the future somewhere. So if you can give us a sense of that investment and what makes you feel like it is worth it.
Well, first I would say that flying is going to come back. Caribbean tourism is going to come back. And we are positioning ourselves to be in the right place to take advantage of those opportunities when they come. Now, as an airline, we've had a strategy for being in every major Caribbean city by 2025. And admittedly, COVID has come and has interrupted somewhat of that plan, but we're still following the plan. And by and large, we will still be in most of the Caribbean cities by that time. Now, how do you expand through all of this? One is that we've taken the last 8 years, essentially, and we've worked on science as to how we operate so we can drive our unit cost down while offering a safe and an affordable service. We've looked at times of the day that's necessary to fly. We've looked at how do we combine the traffic that may be going island to island versus the traffic that may need to go to an island so that they can take a plane to get, be it to North America to Europe, and create a schedule around that, offering more direct routes. More direct routes mean that you don't have the opportunity for some of these governments to tack on a few dollars onto the ticket. And so it gives the traveler an incentive to continue to make his trip. And those are the reasons, or those are the activities, the actions in which Caribbean has taken that has put us in this position to go forward. Now, we don't expect to make a whole lot of money in the here and now. As I've said, and as you've also remembered, this is a long-term investment for us. Mm-hmm. As a Caribbean owned business and as a Caribbean person, my roots are, my navel string is buried here, as we like to say, in this part of the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. And so it is a long-term investment. We're creating another Caribbean institution.
Indeed.
One that is geared to providing the essential service that we need in order for us to have the kinds of integration we talk about, have the kinds of opportunities, be it employment opportunities, be it opportunities for studying. For all, there's a number of reasons in which we have to travel from one Caribbean island to another. And as time roll on, we expect that those numbers will increase. Mr. Sept alluded to the fact that we were doing some multi-destination vacations. Well, I'm happy to report that because of the connectivity that we have created in the Northern Caribbean, that number is up to 35% of the passengers on our plane pre-COVID.
Excellent.
And replicating that in the Eastern Caribbean or the Southern Caribbean and providing those same connective opportunities, we move towards where the Caribbean now advertises or promotes itself as a single destination. And all of these countries are just, niche places you go to have your niche enjoyment that you're looking for to find my part of the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
I think though, that if I may, anybody who's listening and watching this and knows anything about the history of traveling around in the Caribbean is certainly going to be in agreement with most of what's been said so far about the fact that traveling around the Caribbean can be such a hassle, unnecessarily so. And the tax question is important, so traveling around the Caribbean can be expensive. And traveling around the Caribbean can be difficult for the survival of the carriers themselves. So 2 quick questions then. One, what is it that Inter-Caribbean knows that LIAT doesn't know and the others that have come and gone don't know? And how are you able to work with the other carriers within the region to make sure that there is this kind of connectivity and that there ultimately will be hassle-free travel? Well, I suppose I have a third question. Let me just ask this third one. Who's listening? Because we all know that there can be greater efficiencies, and we all know that things can be tighter and so on. And we all know that if the governments listened, and if the government sat with the private sector, as Justin Ram was saying earlier, perhaps some things could change. Is anybody listening? And what is it that you know, Inter-Caribbean, that the others don't know?
Well, Hugh, I think that's a great question, and I'm an old man, so I'll take it off and bits and pieces as I can remember it. But first and foremost, I think the governments are going to be, well, they have to come to the table. In our discussions with most of them, I think they recognize the fact that they don't have the income now to just go and bankroll another entity. And the nature of private enterprise is that we're based on profits, right? We do not have an agenda to say every flight we do must be profitable. But at the end of the day, we're investing in the future, and we're investing so that we can get a return on our money for our shareholders. In doing so, it drives us to operate more efficiently, or as efficiently as we can. Obviously, aviation is one of these things that you have to be very mindful of, because not every efficient opportunity you get is one that you need to take. Because one thing that does not trump safety is efficiency. So you have to first be safe and then be efficient. And sometimes it may not be necessary for you to be efficient on certain points. What I will say is that being able to select, first of all, the best airplane for the job, because you have different airplanes that are better suited for different missions. Selecting the best airplane for the mission that you have, operating more direct routes. In fact, operating the hub and spoke system, we found, has been very efficient and also very cost effective. Because rather than flying to all these destinations trying to move people, if you can put everyone, say from Barbados, from St. Lucia to Barbados, if they're going to Grenada or if they're going to Dominica, or if they're going to St. Vincent. Now you have 5 of each person on that airplane. So your cost of coming from St. Lucia you've already got it. And now once you leave Barbados and you've got 5 people from St. Lucia, 5 from Grenada, 5 from St. Vincent going to Dominica, again, you achieve some economies of scale. And that helped to better the operating economics. I think where the governments have recognized, and now it's time for them to basically, show us the money, is that the taxes need to be reduced. The regulatory hurdles of operations need to be reduced. I believe Dr. Ram mentioned the MASA agreement, and that is certainly something that is necessary because that helped to set up a competitive environment. And a competitive environment is one of the tenets that will help us in private enterprise to stay on top of your game, offer the best service, and offer the best price that you can. So those are certainly the things that has created the success that Intercaribbean has been able to achieve so far. And of course, the other thing is having your staff buy into your vision. And they have to feel, taste, and be part of it for it to be successful. Because, I sit in an office in Providenciales, or if I'm traveling, I'm behind a computer. But it takes the person that's out there, that's checking in the customer, to smile, to say thank you, to provide some information on your flight. Maybe your flight's going to be 10 minutes late. Maybe there's some other inconvenience you have. Maybe there's some weather delays. Whatever the case is, we have to communicate. And as simple as it is, by communicating, that is part of the customer service and is part of what makes the customer want to come back to your business.
Right. So the final last point, or the last 2 points are so critical. How your staff is treated and how in turn they treat the customer. Critical. I think to some extent, a lot of our regional carriers have suffered greatly as a result of lack of attention to that particular point. Someone in the chat here says Inter-Caribbean, best airline to the Caribbean. So
Thank you.
But you must be doing something right in that.
Thank you.
Case. Another person says, Steve Duncan asked the question, how critical is government subsidies to regional airline survival? Should it be a prerequisite? I'm not even sure those subsidies are happening, but perhaps Lyndon or Trevor, you could speak to that.
Interesting question, because
Indeed.
If you're a government-owned airline, somehow the need for a government subsidy ensures your survival. It's never then about the efficiency of the company. Mm-hmm. Whereas a private entity, you put up your hand, you tend to be ignored. So you have to be efficient at what you do, because the expectation of any hope for help is very, very slim. So we candidly, as a private entity, we have to find our own way. There is no government assistance for an airline such as us as a private entity.
Right.
But I will hasten to add, particularly now, it is important that governments step up to the plate and offer some assistance. It maybe not any hard cash as they may think, but there are a number of ways in which they can provide soft assistance to it. Let me be very clear. Having an efficient, safe, and a reliable scheduled air service in the Caribbean is to the benefit of all of us in the Caribbean. And it's to the benefit to all the governments, and they have a vested interest in making these things succeed. And whilst they may sit and ignore and not want to give any kind of assistance whatsoever and say, well, you guys go and duke it out. At the end of the day, when you, if there's any, uh, well, let me just say the only way that you can be assured getting through this period is to operate very efficiently. And there are a number of services that I believe that we should be operating that we're simply unable to operate at this time. And government would be wise to invest in those things and provide the necessary assistance in the here and now to get past COVID.
Well, there's a tail end to that.
Sure.
I mean, just get back to Frederick's question for a second there, and this is really a question for Justin as well. So in post-COVID, in the post-COVID era, there's a belief that when we look at international carriers, there will be no such thing as carriers looking for destinations to fly to, only destinations paying carriers to fly to them. So we'll see perhaps the return of minimum revenue guarantees, the systems where airlines and governments get together and get into an arrangement that pretty much guarantees certain levels of seat occupancy. So what can a regional carrier do to discuss some kind of minimum revenue guarantee, or is it entirely off the table and that's a facility that's only available to international carriers flying into the Caribbean, while carriers doing intra-Caribbean tourism, you're on your own?
Maybe I can just say something about that. I think that our governments need to do a number of things before we start talking about minimum revenue guarantees. Like I mentioned before, and Chairman Gardner and Subsidies CEO Sadler, they have said that all of our assets need to be utilized in an efficient way, and that includes our airports. One of the main reasons why we have these high fees is to pay for the cost of the airports. Now, why can't we start thinking about our airports as revenue generating places rather than just simply cost centers? I like to think of an airport as a mall with a runway. There are ways for us to start using our airports in a much more innovative way. Now, our airports, we probably don't have the same amount of traffic as, for example, in Miami, because as you go through Miami airport, it's like a mall, you can do many things. But I think it's time for us to start thinking innovatively about how our airports can start generating more cash. And I think one of the best ways, first steps in doing that, is for us to consider privatizing some of these airports. You know, as I keep saying, we need to move towards a private sector-led model here. And that is also important. Now, there are probably going to be some routes in the Caribbean where if a government wants to have a scheduled service with a certain amount of capacity and frequency on that particular route, then maybe they might have to subsidize that. But what you simply do, first of all, is to say, okay, here is the service that I want, the frequency, the amount of seats that I want, the schedule of the service, and ask airlines to bid on the provision of that service and let the most efficient operator win that bid. That will give you an opportunity to perhaps reduce any subsidy to as minimum as possible. Because you might say to that airline, I'll give you a franchise, let's say for 3 to 5 years. Let's see how you operate that. But I'm also going to say to you that after 5 years, we'll put this out to tender again. So if you want to hold on to that route, you have to be continuously improving your efficiency. I think that that's a better way than saying upfront, let us just go to minimum revenue guarantees. And do I think that we certainly need to have minimum revenue guarantees for even international flights? Look, I would really want to do some more analysis of that, Hugh, to see if that is actually so necessary, because I think many of our governments have got stuck in that whirlpool whereby the international carriers have said that we will only come if you continue to pay us this. And I think those arrangements need to be discussed and perhaps recalculated to encourage those international airlines to have much more of the risk. Because look, let's face it, the Caribbean is a beautiful place. As Chairman Gardner said, people are going to start coming back to the Caribbean because they want to get away from some of the hustle and bustle that they're accustomed to where they live. We have an opportunity in the post-COVID-19 era to show look, we have managed fairly well. Come to the Caribbean and enjoy a serene place, a place that where you are safe. I think if we start marketing ourselves well, we could actually get away from the need to subsidize many of these international carriers, but only subsidize particular routes if we absolutely need to, based on some level of very good analysis.
If I may just interject and say one thing. I think what we will find, and I'm sure Dr. Ram may agree with me, as in the here and now, whilst the Caribbean is sort of coming back, you will find where some of the international carriers may have a need to cut services into some of the airports. And so it's going to be very important that we do have the air connectivity, so that wherever they decide that they're going to fly, we're still able to get tourists, diaspora, and our people that may have gone to these places for whatever reason. We're still going to need to get them home. And so that's even one more reason why we need to have a viable regional air service. And that's why I believe that government needs to take a more proactive approach in ensuring that we have one.
I can just add to that, if I may. Just it comes to the issue of sustainability, and partly to a prior question, but because we are an airline that services not just the region in terms of the traffic we hope to attract, but because we are an airline with interline partnerships. So we have a long-standing relationship with British Airways, and that's been extended in terms of the new routes, and we've quickly seen the amount of traffic that isn't coming to Barbados, but is happy to make the connection out of Barbados to the other destinations that we serve. When it comes to working with other airlines in the region, we believe we've been a leader in always making those approaches. We do have an interline relationship with Caribbean Airlines, with Win Air, with Air Caribe, with Cubana, to name the airlines within the Caribbean alone. Then we have with other European airlines. So we do extend our hand in saying, whilst we'd love to come to your market, it isn't always about us coming to take over your market. If we can come and cooperate, collaborate, we certainly extend that hand to work together, because we don't have the monopoly on all the ideas. We can't possibly serve every market effectively, but we can serve many more markets when we can collaborate.
That's a very important point. Let me go back to you, Justin, for 1 second on that. The competitive landscape as a matter of economics. You know, again, without being an expert in the industry, and certainly not an economist of any measure, even though I did economics as a major for my bachelor's degree, but so I know just enough to be slightly dangerous. I will say that, you know, in the airline industry, it's usually a small number of players, right? You know, not oligopoly or something of the sort. In the Caribbean, how important in the Caribbean marketplace for there to be robust competition in the industry? Are there enough players, et cetera?
Sorry, we certainly have competition. If you look at the Caribbean, and perhaps place four corners of the Caribbean, with Bahamas to the north, Cayman to the south, come over to the east, and what was then Liat prior to the current situation, and then Caribbean Airlines further to the south and east. So the four corners were basically government airlines. There exists one other government airline closer to the middle, and then the rest, which is only a handful of carriers, are private enterprises trying to make their way. We built our network much more so in the north and the west of the Caribbean before we started the journey coming east. And Tortola was for a while our most eastern point until we began launching out to Dominica, Antigua, and St. Lucia. So we were already in the market, if we were not known necessarily by the markets we had not yet reached into. So for us, this was a progressive journey. We've extended the relationships with everyone that are in these markets, that we're happy and we wish to work together. But if it is for that we cannot achieve an agreement with someone, well, we have to keep marching down the road ourselves and let the market determine their preferences.
Of course. Dr. Ram?
Yeah, but just to answer your question, I think that the competition is actually very essential. And like Trevor said, I think we have a number of airlines that are operating in the region. Certainly within different points within the Caribbean, you have different airlines operating. But like I said before, that multilateral air services agreement is quite a critical one, because that then means that it's a fair level playing field. What we want is a situation is that we want airlines to make money and to make profits in a fair way. That is by being much more cost efficient and operating safely rather than being subsidized. So one of the things that we have to be really mindful of here is that while we are encouraging the private sector to develop, we have to be mindful of the state-owned owned airlines and ensure that they are also operating on a level playing field as well, because it's very difficult for any private sector firm to compete against an airline that is perhaps being subsidized by the governments that own it. So that's going to be critical. And in this, I am not naive. I mean, I often have heard the point saying that, how do you make a millionaire? Well, you tell a billionaire to start an airline. So I know that it is not an easy thing to do. But I think the onus on the regulators and the government is to ensure that we want to ensure, and say to someone like Chairman Gardner and of course the CEO Sadler, deploy your capital. We're going to ensure that you have a level playing field so that you have every opportunity to make a profit. But it depends on how well you run your enterprise. I think that's as simple as we can make it, and that we're not going to do anything to unfair you. I think that's all that we ask. And I think if we were to get that correct, we'd see many more people bringing their capital to do what they want. Because I mean, the airline industry is something that most people, I think, growing up would have probably had some dream of getting into having an airline. And if you have your capital and you want to do that, well, by all means, come and do it in the Caribbean if we have a fair playing field for you to do so.
I think it's a fair point. And at the end of the day, it is a public-private partnership, because the regulator is the government. And we've referred many times in this discussion to the Multilateral Air Services Agreement. That is a government instrument. And as a matter of fact, it's a CARICOM instrument. So it's to everyone's advantage to work together to make sure that the regulator, which is the government, and the private sector entity work closely together towards the common good. So if we could, we're reaching the end. Everyone in the Caribbean is pretty much in the same boat. Well, some people say that we're not all in the same boat. We're in the same storm, but not necessarily.
They are different boats.
We're in different boats. Until Inter-Caribbean and other private sector leaders can really get things going again, what is there for a government to do? What about international financial institutions? What about regional institutions? Where does a government go to answer the immediate need until we can get tourism restarted in what we keep saying is the post-COVID-19 era. In the meantime, what happens? Justin, where do we find money? Where do governments go? What happens to these sources of funds that need to answer the question that everybody's grandmother asks? You know, while the grass is growing, the horse is starving. This grass is growing. We know that we know what's going to happen with Inter-Caribbean by 2025. Lyndon Gardner told us where he's going to expand to and so on. But in the meantime, what does a government do? How do people stay alive?
That's a very good question, Hugh, and one that inevitably we're going to have a higher appetite for debt, because governments are going to have to support the economies in the short term until we're able to get back to where we need to be. But in addition to spending money, the governments also need to do things on the soft side, that is reforming the regulatory environment, reforming the business environment, so that persons, individuals, corporations who have capital can feel as if the Caribbean is a place where I want to invest. So it's first of all, government steps in, it spends a bit more money. Where does it get that money from? Well, I think we have to think innovatively. I think that there's a lot of money within the current banking sector that perhaps isn't earning much return, and governments can try to tap into that and say, for example, Hugh, why don't you put $1,000 into a government bond, which I can pay you a bit more interest than if you were getting that you are currently getting from your bank account. We have to think innovatively about that. And the way how governments can perhaps get out of that debt is perhaps saying, I can convert that debt into some equity stake, maybe even an equity stake in the airport, so that that debt now stops being a debt to the government, and you now as an individual have an equity stake in running that airport efficiently. So coming back to this whole area, so how we give people a stake in our economies and at the same time reflating the economies. But at the same time, what governments have to do now is ensure that when we come out of this pandemic, the private sector feels as if it can invest in the Caribbean, that this is a wonderful place to do business. It's a wonderful place for you to set up an airline and to operate. It's a wonderful place for you to build a new hotel, a wonderful place for you to set up a manufacturing facility, because now we have made the doing business environment so conducive for that. So I think it's simply just a two-step approach. First, government spending, converting that debt into equity, so that their debt eventually comes down and people have a stake in running the economy, and then ensuring that private sector can have a level playing field to do good business in the Caribbean. We've been speaking about aviation, but this actually transcends beyond aviation into other industries as well.
I think when you say that the governments will need to have a higher appetite for debt, Justin, is it that they never did? Because the region has been known for its level of debt. So I don't know if it's necessarily a higher appetite for debt, but the need to go into debt at this point, right? Perhaps there wasn't a big need before, but the appetite was always there. The question, I suppose you're saying, or the question is the type of debt instruments that will come out of this situation, and the care that will need to be had in what those debt instruments look like, correct?
Yes, let me just say that the US, the United Kingdom, larger economies with world currencies are able primarily to issue new debt now, and they don't have to be too concerned about being able to repay that, because when they print their money, people still accept the value of that currency. We are not in that position. And when I say the appetite for debt, I'm really talking about creditors here. Creditors are going to have to say, look, although our governments are fairly highly indebted already, and maybe in a normal times, I would not want to lend more to them, we're going to have to say, unless we lend them more and get these economies going again, that initial injection of government resources is going to be very critical. But creditors should say to governments, I'm going to lend you this money, but could you please reform your business environment so that over time I can see a pathway for you bringing down your debt, maybe even converting that debt into equity, but ensuring that the private sector then becomes the engine of growth. Now is the time for us to take advantage of this very unfortunate situation and reform our economies in the way where we really need to be going.
Right. Well, I mean, such a vibrant and exciting discussion on so many levels. Hugh, unless you have another question right now, I'll sort of like wrap it into this final question that I have. Would you like to, shall I proceed in that manner?
Please.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we've probably gone over just a little over an hour, and really touched on a lot of really unbelievable issues, and all worthy of more discussion. And so before I ask this last question, I just want to lay an invitation to everyone that when we call upon you again for different panels, that you'll be there, because yeah, the input here has been extraordinary. But let me just ask this last question. The marketing message. I'm a lawyer by training, and you know, I dabble in other professions, but I'm a lawyer by training, and a media person, obviously, and an entrepreneur, and marketing and PR and messaging, and when Lyndon talked about what's in a name, those are the things those excite me. You know, you have to have the right name, and so let's talk a little bit about that marketing message as you expand, Linda and Trevor, as you guys expand, and you are speaking to your existing customer base and talking about that expansion, but you're also reaching out to the rest of the region and to folks that really, you know, may not know the name Inter-Caribbean. And what do you want to tell them? What is your marketing message to these folks? What is the PR message? I mean, from on-time arrivals to great COVID safety measures, what is it that you're going to tell Caribbean people and those that are interested in the service that you provide by way of marketing?
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
So there's obviously a lot in this, but I think a strong message for the everyday Caribbean person is this company is a Caribbean airline. It is not a foreign entity. It is not owned by a government. It is here thanks to the steady leadership over near 3 decades now of Lyndon Gardner as a Caribbean man, building on a dream he didn't know he initially had, but the dream has grown with him as the years have gone by. He touched on a very important point, and that's important for everyone in the Caribbean, that in supporting a Caribbean airline, not an airline that's taking you somewhere else in order to come back, that money is staying in the Caribbean, it's being reinvested in the Caribbean, and those dollars are for use in the Caribbean. So this is the opportunity to build the strength. In terms of us as a company, of course, we, like everyone else, have had to adapt to COVID measures and taking care of the public perception and the reality of cleaning and sanitizing airplanes. That alone is not enough to get people back on an airplane by itself, with the unfortunate costs for COVID-19 tests, which in of itself now doubles your air travel. And whilst there's some movement afoot to make that a little bit easier for everyone, and Barbados announced now specific destinations coming in, making that a little bit easier for people to begin to travel again. And we look forward to seeing that. But importantly, for Inter-Caribbean, with 27 destinations, come aboard, join our frequent flyer program. If you have to fly another airline because it's the choice at the time, please do. But you know, we welcome you. Join Cacique Rewards, our loyalty program, because as you earn enough points through flying with us, you have 27 destinations today that you're going to be able to redeem those points for free flights across the Caribbean. So there is nobody else that can give you that today. We're working on enhancing and extending that program. So we truly want the program to have value for the whole Caribbean and be part of your lifestyle, fly with Inter-Caribbean.
And if I could just add two things, I know we're getting low on time, but I think it's very important that that we say we speak about our 28 years of safe history, and I also think that when people think about traveling in the Caribbean, that we're the only true pan-Caribbean airline. There is only the sun covers the Caribbean better than we do, and only the ocean goes to more shores.
All right, that's the marketing pitch that I wanted to hear. That's the one. Well, I want to say that Tempo is right there with you, man. We cover the Caribbean in much the same way, and that's a brilliant one. I gotta add that to my library. Thank you. But listen, we want to wish you the very best as you and Trevor move to expand here at Tempo. Any entity or organization or movement or person that is adding value to the Caribbean landscape and improving lives of Caribbean people and solving problems for Caribbean people has our vote. And so from this discussion, it's clear that Inter-Caribbean has that mindset. And so for that reason, we here at Tempo applaud the work that you're doing. And know that we will be here to support that endeavor going forward. Hugh, your final words to the panelists.
Well, just to say that we're extraordinarily thankful that you spent some time with us and gave us the benefit of your wisdom. One never knows, what's in an entrepreneur's head. Lyndon Gardner told us that what gave the impulse to start the airline in the first place. His girlfriend was on another island.
Right. I have to laugh at that.
Most of us would just find a girlfriend that's closer. He decided to start an airline.
Right.
So who knows what leads to greatness? But in all seriousness, we are extremely proud to have Inter-Caribbean flying 27 routes. We never got the opportunity to talk about some of these other issues that we're going to touch on when next you come back. We need to talk about your equipment. You've got fabulous aircraft. Your route system is growing all the time. The passenger counts are growing all the time. And one of the things that Frederick and I talked about was a wonderful story about customer service on Inter-Caribbean Airways. And we didn't have an opportunity to talk about that as well. But we will, and it means that we have to do part 2 of the road ahead. So Frederick has the final word on all of this, but I, on my own personal behalf and on behalf of the PM group, I'd like to say thank you for being with us, and I'm going to toss it back to Frederick. The final word is yours, sir.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, and I echo all of those sentiments. And Dr. Ram, Justin, brilliant. It was a pleasure to talk economics with you, and I hope that the messages you send fall directly on the ears of those that it need to fall on. We do have relationships, as you do, with Caribbean governments, and the more we talk about this and educate our community, even just normal folks, to understand this, because those are the folks that they have to listen to, at least theoretically, if they want to remain in the positions that they're in. So getting this type of information out in the manner in which you did, which everybody could understand, is very, very useful. So keep that common touch, Dr. Ramian, and getting that message out. So thank you very much. Again, yes, Trevor, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to show that model airplane that I love so much. So you better pick it up.
Just 1 second. I have.
Okay.
Here
Right.
There we go. If everyone can see this, this is our flagship airplane, the Embraer 145 50-seat jet, and obviously she's perfect airplane for crisscrossing the Caribbean fast.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it looks like a beautiful aircraft.
She's a sweet airplane.
Indeed. Well, I look forward to taking my own personal ride there. And I know that once folks see that, they'll be like, wow, yeah, we need to fly with Inter-Caribbean Airways.
Yes.
Because, Caribbean people are people with vibes, eh? And that model, that plane right there got a lot of vibes in it. Right. So again, thank you, Linda. And any final words?
I would just like to say that it's certainly a grateful opportunity that we have to be able to provide service to our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. As we move beyond COVID, it's very important that you support Caribbean, that you provide us, give us an opportunity to take you to the island next door. I'm building an institution. I would like to continue to offer more opportunities to more of us in the Caribbean. And in order to do that, we definitely need your support. Thank you, everyone, for the support you've given so far and the support you will give us in the future.
Indeed, indeed. Very well said. And Justin, do you have any final words? Would you like to make mention of anything specific?
But just to say thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's been a real great pleasure to be here with both you and Hugh, and of course, Chairman Gardner and Trevor. I want to say to them, continue doing what they do, and certainly have my full support, and anything I can do to assist in helping their operations, I'll be happy to do that. My job, of course, is to be a great advocate, knowing that we can build a great Caribbean if we have the right environment in place. So thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, to our faithful audience, the Temple family, thank you for your loyalty always. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Road Ahead. We look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Until next time, Temple forever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.